1960s gave us the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Bob Dylan, names that still dominate classic rock radio today. But for every legend that endured, there were dozens of bands that ruled the charts, packed arenas, and defined the sound of a generation, only to disappear completely. Tonight, we're uncovering 12 rock bands that once owned the airwaves but have been forgotten by time. Some of their stories will shock you. Number 12, The Left Banke.
Just walk away, Renee. You won't see me follow.
Walk Away Renee, if you know that song, you know The Left Banke, even if you don't realize it. This New York quintet pioneered Baroque pop rock music, infused with classical orchestration that would later influence the Beatles and the Beach Boys. Formed in 1965 around 16-year-old Michael Brown, they scored with Walk Away Renee hitting number 5 in 1966, followed by Pretty Ballerina. These weren't just pop songs, they were miniature symphonies featuring harpsichords and string arrangements. But internal warfare destroyed them almost immediately. Brown clashed constantly with lead singer Steve Martin-Caro over creative control. Without their primary songwriter, the Left Banke crumbled by 1969. Today, Walk Away Renee remains a classic, but most listeners have no idea who created it. Next up, a Los Angeles band that didn't just ride the psychedelic wave. They helped create it with studio effects that wouldn't become standard for years. Their biggest hit asked the question, what happens when you dream too much? Number 11, The Electric Prunes.
I had too much to drink last night.
I Had Too Much to Dream Last Night. The title alone captures the psychedelic madness of 1967. The Electric Prunes crafted some of the most innovative rock music of the era, using fuzz boxes, reverb, and studio effects that were revolutionary for their time. Their 1966 debut single became a top 20 hit and established them as pioneers of garage rock psychedelia. But their downfall came from their own record label. Producer David Axelrod took increasing control, eventually replacing the original members with session musicians. By 1970, the original lineup had disbanded, bitter and disillusioned. They'd helped create psychedelic rock, but the industry had chewed them up and spit them out. Our next band created one of the most hypnotic grooves in rock history, but they'd already broken up by the time their masterpiece became a hit. Can you name the British quartet whose season finally arrived too late? Number 10, The Zombies.
It's the time of the season.
Time of the season. Those 4 words conjure up one of the most hypnotic grooves in rock history. The Zombies created sophisticated pop music that blended jazz-influenced arrangements with rock energy in ways that wouldn't be fully appreciated until decades later. This British quartet scored early hits with She's Not There and Tell Her No. But their masterpiece was the 1968 album Odyssey and Oracle. Problem? The band had already broken up by the time it was released. Time of the Season didn't become a hit until 1969, a full year after the Zombies disbanded. The song's success was bittersweet, proof of their genius, but the band was no longer together to enjoy it. In 2019, they were finally inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, 50 years too late. Think sunshine pop and perfect harmonies. This next band's philosophy was simple. Let's live for today. But when the 60s ended and rock got heavier, their sunny disposition couldn't survive the changing times. Number 9, The Grassroots. Let's Live for Today wasn't just a song, it was a philosophy that defined the optimistic spirit of the mid-1960s. The Grassroots specialized in sunshine pop, creating perfectly crafted radio hits that captured the carefree attitude of the era. Originally a studio project by songwriters P.F. Sloan and Steve Barry, they evolved into a real touring band fronted by Rob Grill. Their hits included Midnight Confessions and Sooner or Later, each one a masterclass in pop songcraft. But as the decade ended and rock music grew more experimental and socially conscious, the Grassroots' sunny disposition felt out of step. The rise of FM radio pushed them to the margins. By the early 1970s, their chart success had dried up, and they became a nostalgia act. Our next entry gave us one of the most joyful songs ever recorded, a perfect slice of 1967 optimism. Two singers with a great sense of humor led this band, but legal troubles would eventually tear them apart. Number 8, The Turtles.
Hold her tight, so happy together.
Happy Together remains one of the most joyful songs ever recorded. A perfect slice of 1967 optimism that still brings smiles more than 50 years later. The Turtles, led by Howard Kaylan and Mark Volman, created memorable pop music with hits like She'd Rather Be With Me and Eleanor. They were known for their sense of humor. Their concerts were as much comedy shows as musical performances. But legal battles with their record label drained their finances and energy. By 1970, Kaylan and Volman disbanded the group and joined Frank Zappa's Mothers of Invention as the comedy duo Flo and Eddie. The Turtles' catalog remains beloved, but they never again reached the commercial heights of Happy Together. Picture this: Revolutionary War uniforms, high-energy garage rock, and one of the most entertaining live shows of the 60s. This band combined theatrical showmanship with driving rock music, but their wholesome image became their downfall. Number 7, Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Girl, you better get straight.
Dressed in Revolutionary War uniforms and playing high-energy garage rock, Paul Revere and the Raiders were one of the most entertaining bands of the 1960s. Built around keyboardist Paul Revere and singer Mark Lindsay, their songs like Kicks, Hungry, and Good Thing were proto-punk anthems. They were television pioneers, becoming the house band on Dick Clark's Where the Action Is. This exposure made them one of the most recognizable bands in America during the mid-1960s. But as rock music grew more sophisticated and rebellious, the Raiders' wholesome image and costume act began to feel dated. The rise of psychedelic rock left little room for clean-cut guys in colonial outfits. By 1970, the original lineup had dissolved. A 16-year-old stepped up to the microphone in Memphis and created one of the greatest blue-eyed soul records ever made. This band's biggest hit spent 4 weeks at number 1, but their young frontman had bigger artistic ambitions. Number 6, the Box Tops.
When she wrote me a letter, said she couldn't live without me no more.
When 16-year-old Alex Chilton recorded The Letter, nobody expected it to become one of the greatest blue-eyed soul records ever made. The Box Tops, formed in Memphis in 1967, perfectly bridged rock and R&B. The Letter spent 4 weeks at number 1 and became one of the defining songs of 1967. They followed with hits like Cry Like a Baby and Soul Deep, establishing themselves as premier blue-eyed soul artists. But Chilton grew tired of commercial pressures and wanted to explore more experimental music. By 1970, he'd left to form Big Star, one of the most influential power pop bands of the 1970s. Without Chilton, the Box Tops quickly faded. 4 voices that blended like silk, 2 songs that defined California dreaming. But behind the beautiful harmonies was ugly drama that would destroy one of the most talented vocal groups of the decade. Number 5, the Mamas and the Papas.
California dreaming on such a winter's day.
California Dreamin' and Monday Monday perfectly captured the laid-back spirit of the 1960s West Coast scene. The quartet, John Phillips, Michelle Phillips, Dennis Doherty, and Cass Elliot, had voices that blended like silk, creating sophisticated harmonies influenced by the Beatles, but distinctly American. But behind the beautiful music was ugly drama. John and Michelle Phillips' marriage was falling apart, complicated by affairs and drug use. The group's personal problems became tabloid fodder, overshadowing their music achievements. Their career was remarkably brief, only together from 1965 to 1968. Cass Elliott's death in 1974 at age 32 ended any possibility of a reunion. The music remains timeless, but the band burned out as quickly as it had ignited. The jangly guitar sound that defined folk rock came from this band. Their electric version of a Bob Dylan song created an entirely new genre, but constant lineup changes would plague them throughout their career. Number 4, the Byrds. The jangly guitar sound that defined folk rock? That was the Byrds. Their electric version of Bob Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man in 1965 created an entirely new genre, bridging folk music and rock and roll. Led by Roger McGuinn's distinctive 12-string Rickenbacker guitar, they were innovators who pioneered folk rock, helped create country rock, and experimented with Indian classical music. Their hits include Turn, Turn, Turn and 8 Miles High. But the Byrds were plagued by constant lineup changes. Gene Clark left in 1966, David Crosby was fired in 1967, Chris Hillman departed in 1968. By the decade's end, only McGuinn remained from the classic lineup. Their influence was enormous, but the band became a shadow of its former greatness. This British band brought gritty R&B to the masses with a 6-minute blues epic that proved rock could be both commercial and artistic. Their lead singer's powerful voice made working-class anthems, but success bred conflict. Number 3, The Animals.
In the house of the rising sun.
House of the Rising Sun, 6 minutes of pure blues power that proved rock music could be both commercial and artistic. The Animals, led by Eric Burdon's powerful vocals and Alan Price's haunting organ, brought British R&B to the masses. Formed in Newcastle, they were grittier than their contemporaries. While the Beatles sang about love, the Animals sang about pain and struggle. Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood and We Gotta Get Out of This Place became working-class anthems. Their version of House of the Rising Sun spent 3 weeks at number 1 in both the UK and US. But disputes over money and creative control tore them apart. Price left in 1965, and the classic lineup dissolved. Internal strife destroyed one of the most powerful bands of the British invasion. For a brief moment, this British band seemed like they might challenge the Beatles for supremacy. Their thunderous drums even knocked I Wanna Hold Your Hand off the UK charts. But their formula quickly grew stale. Number 2, the Dave Clark 5. For a brief moment in 1964, the Dave Clark 5 seemed like they might challenge the Beatles for supremacy. Their thunderous drums and catchy melodies made them British invasion giants. Glad All Over even knocked I Wanna Hold Your Hand off the UK charts. The DC-5 had a heavier sound than most contemporaries. Dave Clark's pounding drums dominated their arrangements, while hits like Bits and Pieces and Because were perfectly crafted pop rock anthems. They appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show more than any British band except the Beatles. But as rock evolved and became more sophisticated, their straightforward approach felt dated. By 1970, they disbanded, relegated to oldies radio after being one of the biggest bands in the world. Our final entry lasted only 2 brief years, but created some of the most important music in rock history. This Los Angeles supergroup featured 3 songwriters who would define the sound of the 1970s. If only they could have gotten along. Number 1, Buffalo Springfield.
What's that sound? Everybody look what's rolling now.
For 2 years, Buffalo Springfield created some of the most important music in rock history. This Los Angeles supergroup featured Neil Young, Stephen Stills, and Richie Furay, 3 songwriters who would go on to define 1970s rock with Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and Poco. Formed in 1966, they pioneered country rock. For What It's Worth, written by Stills about the Sunset Strip riots, became a counterculture anthem. Young contributed psychedelic epics, Stills wrote driving rockers, and Furay provided gentle country ballads. But Buffalo Springfield was doomed by the talent that made them special. Young and Stills clashed constantly over musical direction. Young's unpredictable behavior created additional tension. Their final concert was in May 1968, ending one of rock's most promising careers. Young went solo and joined CSN. Stills formed the supergroup. Furay founded Poco. Their influence far exceeded their brief existence, but they were too volatile to survive. These 12 bands didn't just make music, they shaped rock and roll. Their stories remind us that talent doesn't always guarantee lasting success. Which forgotten legend deserves to be remembered? Let us know in the comments.